Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the Cutting Room, the show where we talk to live where we cut articles live with experts of content marketing. I'm your host. Tommy is my name, and I'm very excited to talk to our guest today, Brooklin Nash. He is an amazing editor. His previous role, he was at saleshacker.com, did some amazing stuff over there, and really a strong advocate. You should follow him on Twitter, Real Brooklin Nash. It's amazing the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. We have a really good show planned. Before we jump in, I do want to mention that there is an automation course that I am running at the moment. We are signing up for our next cohort. If you are a content marketing team lead, this will be an excellent opportunity to learn the fundamentals of automation and how that can work within your content workflow. Let's get everything underway. Brooklyn, come on the show. So we're going to just jump right in here. The first thing I'm going to ask you is, what do you believe the role of content marketing is within an organization? And furthermore, what would you say your general philosophy on content marketing is?
Oh, loaded question with the two-parter. I've come to realize the last few years that content marketing holds a much bigger place in nearly any organization than I would have thought even just 4 or 5 years ago. I started as a freelancer where I did a little bit of everything and then moved into SEO. And I had that perspective that, oh, okay, you want content, let's talk about SEO strategy, right? And nearly everything I offered was around organic search. But now, especially today, content can serve pretty much any function. You can have content feeding into sales enablement, partner marketing, email marketing, social media, thought leadership, category education. There's just so much to do with content, and there's usually not enough people to do it at any given company. And
I love
then
that.
philosophy. I don't know that I've ever gotten that question. Uh, I don't know how unique this is, but what I try to bring to content with the clients that I work with is kind of two levels. One is making it very conversational, so leaving jargon and buzzwords and things like that behind, and off of that, make it very specific. So if it's a guide, make it a literal how-to where they can take it and run with it and apply it. Or if it's something much broader about category education, root it in research, whether that's your own or pulling from external resources. Just make it as specific as possible. I think I don't think anybody hopefully would disagree with this, that there's a ton of fluff out there. And I think the way you stand out is not buying into fluff and not caving to that.
I love that. Yeah, and there's way too much fluff out there. That's the major thing that I think is something that makes you stand out from a lot of people that we've talked to, or that a lot of the content that I see out there in general is that these very specific, very actionable, what can you do with this information, is really applicable there. Now, you said mostly SEO is when you started, but not anymore. I've seen you kind of rail on content marketing not being an SEO strategy on Twitter, right? It's just a channel.
Yeah.
It's not the entire strategy. Can you dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think unless you're a self-service tool with a pretty low price point, or an average customer value, it doesn't make sense to treat content marketing as synonymous with SEO. In that case, that's probably your best bet, is pull in as many people top of funnel, qualify them, and feed them on down, right? But otherwise, I think you're missing a lot of opportunity for partner marketing, for branding, for things that feed into dark funnel, but would kind of give your whole company a lift in the long run. Um, yeah, that's more or less that's more or less it.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, the dark side of things, and it's actually something that I've been kind of talking about a little bit more lately, in general, where I want my content to be shared within Slack channels, right? What Slack channels is this piece of content going to be shared in? What internal email newsletters is this going to be shared in? Because that's where decisions are really made nowadays. How do you talk about the dark side of things? Like what, like obviously there are metrics that you have to report on, right? If you're working within an org, you have to report on these and kind of talk to your boss about that. How would you say you balance that conversation, the reportable versus the not reportable? There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the balance, you can find the balance in pulling back your content in a way that, pulling back and then orienting yourself and your content to a handful of specific pillars or themes that you're covering over a consistent basis. Maybe that's three or four, usually max. That's what we're working with, is like these big topics where there's, 25 different ways you can slice and dice it. And then from there, you can create content that does feed into something that is more measurable, whether that's email marketing or organic search, or comparison pages for paid search. And you can, under the same pillars, create content that is probably going to be more interesting to create and be more interesting for your audience to consume. And those are the pieces that you'd aim for, like you said, to be shared in those Slack channels or on social media, or get forwarded from somebody who fits your ICP. So it's not so much like trying to spray across everything. It's taking stock of what you want to be talking about over the course of a quarter or a year, and then figuring out which types of content fit within which channel.
Dig into that a little bit more. Talking about the planning aspect in particular, are you normally planning by quarter? Are you looking at the full picture for the year? How's that work for you?
Yeah, it depends on the client. So about 60 or 70% of what we do is execution focused. They have their content strategy on lock. We're just focused on getting stuff across the finish line, right? But with clients where I'm working on strategy, in some cases it's quarter by quarter, where we're prioritizing a case study, the byline articles they want to go out, and then the articles for their own blog, and just looking at how to tie those pieces together. But sometimes, and usually this is on the other end where I was saying, if you're a self-service tool with a low price point, it does make sense to put a lot into organic search, right? And in that case, we're planning out the entire year according to those three or four pillars that we line up.
Now, if you're planning out an entire year like that, I kind of have two questions that you've just raised for me. But if you're planning out the entire year like that, and you have a limited group of people that you're working with, right? A limited team of people that you're working with, how are you rectifying the stuff that you've already planned and the stuff that you have to respond to quickly?
Yeah, usually we leave some slots for more of those topical, timely pieces. And then I just have ongoing conversations with whoever my contact is, whether that's director of marketing or the CEO for some of these early stage startups, and just leave those spots open. So we know, okay, we've got these four articles going out in April that do tie very much to organic search, but we also have a spot for a thought leadership piece that we think we know what we want to cover, because we have kind of a laundry list of things we'd like to cover, but it's not only is it not detrimental, it'd be beneficial to be able to be flexible with that, where we can shift that on down if there's something more timely that comes up. It's like with this market correction, we had 8 different category education thought leadership pieces lined up with a client. We got on a call early this week, or yesterday, it's only Tuesday, yesterday, with the correction, thinking, okay, how can we tie in market correction to potentially, unicorns rethinking their IPO valuation, and then startups at earlier stages kind of tightening their belts in anticipation of what's coming. So that's something we can turn around in, a couple of weeks instead of having it be 2 or 3 months out.
I love that. And then the other thing I want to talk about, it kind of stems off of this, is that content mix, right? We've kind of got a calendar that we're looking at. We've got that balance of things that we create preemptively and then reactively. Generally speaking, right? And I know this is like a loaded question. Where, when you're in the strategy phase, right? As you're looking at what that content mix is going to look like, how are you figuring out what that content mix is? Like, what's your process behind that?
Uh, Two parts, and a lot of that just comes from discovery. Well, not so much discovery, that's a sales term, but like the kickoff calls and getting context from director of marketing or CEO, whoever I'm talking to. And there's two pieces generally I'll ask about. One is who their current buyers are and where they're typically sourced from, and two, where their gaps in content are. So sometimes we come in and they have tons and tons of top of funnel content, but they don't really have anything at bottom of funnel to support their sales team for later stages in the conversation, right? So in that case, we would prioritize that bottom funnel content, get as many case studies across the line as possible, maybe dig into more specific product focused content. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sales has everything they need to be successful, but they're really struggling with top of funnel. So then we would prioritize top of funnel, like the SEO or social partner marketing type things. So it just depends on one, who their buyers are and where they're coming from, and two, what they have in place currently.
Awesome. My priority is more leads. I always want more leads. Um, well, like that's something that comes up quite a bit, right? Especially when we talk to senior leadership. So, um, and I'm coming at this from like an in-house perspective, right? Because I know a few of the people here in our audience are in-house, right? And please, audience, feel free to ask any questions along this line as well. Um, when you're balancing those expectations and you're doing the expectation setting, right, from somebody who is going, we just want more leads, or we just want more traffic, or we just want X, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are you setting those expectations both with clients but also when you were in house, the managing up conversation?
You mean if their sole focus is we want more leads from content?
Yeah. I mean, if they're kind of militant about it, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, how are you? I guess a better question would be like, how are you opening people's eyes to a broader spectrum of things that could be done, or at least be open-minded about the other elements of what that mix could look like?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question because over the last couple of years, I've tried to address that earlier on in my conversations before we ever sign a contract. And if there isn't already an underlying understanding of the wider uses of content beyond, you know, pages that will support paid search and optimize pages for organic search, then nowadays I'd actually prefer not to work with them because I enjoy kind of creating a mix of these different types of content. So usually that happens now. That'll happen earlier on before we ever kick off a project, right? If it's after kickoff, um, I mean, there's only, this is probably not, hopefully it's not a disappointing answer to the question, but at a certain point, it's not my job to convince them of what they need for their business. It's my job to do the best I can to meet their objectives, right? So if they're saying we just want more leads, then I'll, typically that'll be going all in on organic search, at least the things we can control, because we've worked with clients to create things like content for events, repurposing things, gated content, things like that. But we don't, because we're solely focused on the content side of things, we don't touch, how they feed visitors into a gated asset that then will turn into a lead. All we can do is make that lead magnet as attractive as possible, and the rest is up to them.
Nice. Nice. I want to talk about talking about lead magnets. We've talked about top of funnel, bottom of funnel. How do you approach those differently? Like, what's your mindset going into a top of funnel piece versus a bottom funnel or mid funnel piece?
Talking about organic search, it's about search intent, right? What people are looking for answers to. But I think that applies all the way down. So if we're creating bottom of funnel content, so something that's pretty product heavy and connects features to benefits and use cases, we want to get as specific as possible and as really as short as possible, because at that point you're probably speaking to or writing for a VP who's on the tail end of this decision that the team has already taken a look at, and you don't need to educate them on all this context. You just need to get into the weeds of how does A connect to B, which connects to C. Whereas if you're talking about top of funnel content, people are exploring, right? So you want to kind of paint this bigger picture and bring in almost tertiary topics or things that are almost tangential, at least introduce these concepts so that, number one, you're coming across as an authority, and number two, you're opening up more opportunity for them to continue exploring in the space. And hopefully that's with some of your internal resources, or at least partners, implementation partners, or what have you. But at the very least, you're being as helpful as possible in just kind of educating them in the solution, or at least the category.
Awesome. And what's that research process look like for you? Obviously, we can all look at like, okay, for search intent, we can look at keyword research and whatnot. But I've seen you kind of talk about this a little bit, where it's, keyword research is not like intent, right? Like you can't really derive intent from a keyword to a certain degree. What's that research process, that pregame process look like, no matter what part of the funnel that you're looking at, or at least let's kind of separate it out, top of funnel, bottom of funnel.
Mm-hmm. If it's not for search specifically, it's mostly conversations with the folks I'm working with at a client, right? So whoever makes the most sense to talk to. If we're talking about a RevOps topic, then ideally I talk to their internal head of RevOps or whoever the subject matter expert is, right? If we're talking about sales topics, then at least like director of sales or somebody like that. And it becomes kind of a two-part conversation. One, what types of questions are you getting from customers on calls? And two, what do you think is going to be the most helpful to cover from this particular piece? Not even for just bottom of funnel content, but even just kind of almost, I hate overusing thought leadership, but just anytime you can rely on somebody internal at the company to not do the bulk of the work, but provide the bulk of the context for you, I think the better the piece is going to be. Like we're rewriting an article right now on the best interview questions to ask a demand gen marketer. And my contact at the company just went through this process, hiring a demand gen marketer. So we jumped on a call. I went through kind of all the questions they asked, what they would change about what how the piece is situated now, got all of their context. And now we get to take those notes and apply it to this article. And that's just going to turn out to be a much better article than just Googling around for other interview questions and trying to pull it in as somebody who has never interviewed a demand gen marketer.
Right. I think that's important too. And what I'm hearing from you, I think what is important to sort of highlight there is that you're creating a feedback loop, right? You're creating a feedback loop with the people that you're working with, and you're having that internal conversation with folks. And that's something I feel like a lot of us pay lip service to when we talk about doing that, right? We'll go with the Brian Dean, which, by the way, like he got sold, which is awesome. Good for him. But we'll take that skyscraper approach where we're just remixing everybody else's content that shows up in the SERP. But I think what you do a really, really good job of in the content that you create and the content that you've overseen is getting people to lift that content off the page, right? It's something where you get really drawn in. And I think that sort of that research process, those feedback loops, those conversations that you're having definitely plays into that. Can you speak to that maybe a little bit more?
Yeah, feedback loop is a great term for it. I mean, and it basically, well, feedback loop, and hopefully I'm I am mixing metaphors here, but let's take it over here. Is it's getting from big picture to as granular and as specific as we can get. So usually the conversation starts out with somebody who isn't the subject matter expert. It's the content marketing manager, director of content, whoever it is I'm working with. And we're just running through kind of all the ideas that we could cover. And then we have a follow-up conversation with ideally the person who is the subject matter expert in that space. And then we're putting it to them. Do these topics make sense? What would you shift? What would you include? What have we not thought of? And then we can take that and create at least a piece with it. But ideally, if we're kind of going back to what I said, if you're talking about a few specific themes over the course of a quarter of a year, you can take those conversations and use them to inform multiple pieces, right? And then finally we can turn around a draft and then get their feedback on it. And sometimes they'll have some great feedback for us that we wouldn't have thought of. So it's going from up here where it's just ideation phase to, okay, here's kind of topic generation with some input to here's a final feedback round where you're making tweaks.
I love that. And it doesn't sound like you're creating anything in a vacuum, right? I've seen this both on internal teams, the ones that I've worked on, but also in my own experience as a freelancer, right? When I was freelancing, was you get the topic, you figure out the topic, you ideate, you look around there, you create based on what you see, and it's just you and the page. But it sounds like you have a lot more inputs on it on any given piece than it would be just if you were creating on your own, which I absolutely love because it brings that piece to life. There we go. That's the word I'm trying to say there. Which I think is really important to have that level of distinction. We do have a question. This is from Hassan. Yes. What hard skills do you think are important as you develop as a content marketer? Data analysis, SEO, branding, messaging, etc.
I am probably the worst content marketer to ask that question because sometimes I just feel like I have zero hard skills. I'm pretty bad at the analytics side of things. I can get by with like measurement, but like I'm not, anything. I would struggle in a performance marketing or even demand gen marketing role, right? What I like doing is much more in the weeds of the writing and the editorial and things like that. So I know enough analytics to be able to plan content, and that's about it. So hard skills. So that's the caveat. Let's say that. So I will say hard skills. I think investing in being able to be more analytical, because that's something I've purposefully invested in the last couple of years with my two in-house roles. I mean, my manager at Outreach was fantastic about kind of always pushing me to get better and better at that. And I learned so much in those in-house roles. And not just for the measurement side, but I think you can create more unique content if you can become more analytical. So like we put out a report when I was at Sales Hacker, and I mean, I had never put together like a pivot table in Google Sheets or Excel. And I kind of learned how to do that. I took the data set of like the 1,200, 1,300 responses we had, figured out how to create charts in Google Sheets and pass that to the designers to make it all pretty. And it took me probably like 3 times longer than it should have, or probably would have taken somebody else because I hadn't learned those skills before. But right. now I have them, and it was really fun because I was creating content that wasn't just pulling stuff out of thin air. It was based off of a survey of 1,200 people. And then that makes you more valuable, I mean, as a full-time hire or as a freelancer, because then you can come with that skill set, offering that skill set So analytical skills for sure. I don't know if this is so much it's not really a hard skill, but I think interviewing skills, which, okay, it's a soft skill, but sometimes can feel like a hard skill is knowing where to drill down, knowing which questions to ask right off the bat. If you can practice your interviewing skills, I think you'll create better content too, whether that's through a customer interview or like what I was talking about, subject matter expert interview. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one too. I think the best hard skill that you could have, and this is kind of a cop out answer, but the best hard skill you could have is learning enough about each one of those things that come up along the way, so you
Mm-hmm.
can have an intelligent conversation with somebody who actually knows what they're doing.
Yeah, that's
Right?
true because you can, especially if you're in house, you can lean on vendors for specific things. Like we had an email marketer expert as a contractor when I was at outreach because email marketing is not my strong suit, right? But I could at
Right.
least lead those conversations and kind of point her in the right direction. And then she went and worked her magic.
Yeah, that's something that like as the content marketer too, especially as an in-house, and I keep bringing the things back to in-house because we have a lot of folks here who are in-house. It's it's important to be able to translate. I think is the if you're able to speak multiple languages, if you will, being able to translate what this person over here is saying to, I worked with a data scientist, and that data scientist, by working together and learning each other's language, we were able to create some excellent models together for attribution to answer questions like what's the role of our blog in the retention of existing customers, right? But if you don't, as a content marketer, have that ability to translate and communicate in all of these little conversations, then it becomes much more difficult to have your job, because you also have to communicate what the customer is asking you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, how are you communicating that and using that feedback loop into the rest of the organization?
Yeah.
We've got about 2 minutes left here before we jump into the edit itself. We have another question, which is thinking about decision makers who hire content strategists, right? And this is more of a freelancer question. What are some of the things freelance content strategists should know or do poorly?
Should know or typically do poorly. I gotcha.
Yeah, or typically do poorly.
I think, I mean, what's worked for me is being able to recognize quickly kind of where I'm coming in with what they have set up already. Um, so if I don't know if they don't have a full-time content function in place, kind of investing in that kind of T-shaped marketer approach that Tommy was just talking about, so that you can kind of come in and speak to people who they do have on performance marketing side of thing, demand gen, product marketing, data, engineers even, and know how to take those conversations and map it to a content strategy. So at least be well versed enough in product marketing, sales, to take it and run with it instead of having to lean on whoever that hiring manager was, right? Um, and then do poorly. I mean, I can say this because I did it. I was in this place, like I said, 5, 6 years ago, was um, being that hammer that sees everything as a nail, where you're coming in as somebody who SEO really well. So
Right.
you're saying, look, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to get your rankings up, and we're going to start driving traffic. And sometimes it just flops because either there's too much competition for the keywords, the intent isn't there, and you're feeding top of funnel with very unqualified leads, and it just doesn't pan out from an ROI perspective. So being able to recognize what makes the most sense for each situation will probably make you a lot more valuable to potential clients.
And this could be a whole conversation unto itself too, when it comes to like the discovery questions that you're doing in the very beginning part of the process, right? Um, I think a lot of us were there way before, where it's like you do come in, you're like, I know how to do all of this, and then exactly being the hammer that hits every nail, right? It's not good. It doesn't work with anybody. Nobody feels heard, and nobody likes to not feel heard. Okay, so we're gonna jump in now. We're at the half-hour mark here. We're gonna jump into the case study. This was Nick from Content Distribution who put this case study out. And while I'm pulling this up, right, I think what I'd like to hear, what was your initial piece of feedback on this? Because, can you see my screen? Are we looking at the right screen?
Stop for a second. There it is.
There we go. Okay. So to give a little bit of context to folks in the audience, this is a case study from contentdistribution.com, and they are talking about a number of things in here, primarily how they were able to get their client donotpay.com from 0 to 1 million plus organic visitors a month in 24 months. Really great piece. It was a 5,000 word piece, and Brooklyn, you went very deep into it in your video, which we'll be sharing in the follow-up email here. But yeah, what was your first piece of feedback on this 5,000 word monster?
Yeah, if there was a headline, it would be 5,000 word article packed with tons of value. All of it's buried under too high of a word count. So like there's a lot in here. There's a lot on what they did for Do Not Pay specifically. There's a ton of what I saw as a pretty unique take on backlinks and technical SEO versus just pure content volume, as long as you're putting out quality content. There's a whole separate kind of internal case study on how they built their team, which, I mean, Nick, I was super impressed with how quickly you scaled your team. So that was another piece of it. And then there was, what was it? Oh, keyword and keyword research. So there's a ton in here, very practical stuff, but it just didn't feel like it all meshed together into a cohesive whole. So, I mean, we can go through what we pulled out and how kind of separating it out, but yeah, the 5,000 word monster, I don't think would be as effective as a 2,000 word piece, 1,000 word piece, another 2,000 word piece that each accomplish different goals and speak to different things.
I do love that there is the disclaimer in here, though, that is a 5,000 word monster and send it to yourself to read later. Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. Let's pull open, if you want to bring up your version of the article, I'd love to walk through some more of the specifics that you found when you were going through the piece.
So big picture, just to set some context here, it's 5,000 words total. I ended up pulling out basically any element I found that was specifically about Do Not Pay, which ostensibly this was supposed to be a case study about Do Not Pay. And then the other elements I pulled into separate docs, which I haven't touched. I just didn't have time to do the kind of inline edit for these, but pulled 3 other elements into separate docs that I see as standalone pieces. So number 1 is building their content team and scaling production. This was, I think, like 2,000 words, just over 2,000 words, which is, I mean, really in depth and practical for like content managers and directors who are managing vendors, for micro agency owners, for freelancers. I just thought it was really some really practical stuff in there. And then another piece of it was on keyword research, specifically their approach to keyword research as a whole. And then the third was kind of a hot take on backlinks and technical SEO, not really mattering as much as most SEO blogs would have you believe. So all 3 of those pieces I feel are definitely worthy of standalone pieces. So I separated them out. And then we were left with everything on Do Not Pay, which right now is just under 1,500 words, which feels a lot more manageable for somebody who's, I mean, if this is a case study, they're at least middle of funnel, if not bottom of funnel. They're looking at making a decision soon. They don't need all this extra context on technical SEO and backlinks and building the team. They want what the results were and how you worked and that kind of thing. So that's kind of what this piece narrowed down to be. And then, yeah, I mean, what's going to be helpful to go through line by line? Never done this before.
I think the first thing I want to ask is the structure overall, right? Because the first thing you did was you found the structure, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying is the VP on the tail end. They're the ones who are making the decision, and this is something that they would see a little bit more. How do you resist the urge to kind of put it all in there?
To let all, like, everything else in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's putting, I mean, we talked about this in I mean, a little bit, thinking through intent, right? And that all that means is putting yourself in the reader's shoes. So really, it's just looking at what they're going to care about. And somebody who's reading a case study on how the do not pay scaled to 1 million plus sessions is looking for as detailed information about that project specifically as possible. So there's still a lot in here that connects back to those other elements, but it keeps it focused on this project specifically. So the one on the right is the original. One on the left is after my edits. And like Tommy said, there's a recording that kind of goes through what this process looked like. So the first piece was it just felt like it kind of bounced back and forth between this is about do not pay. Okay, now this is about content distribution. Okay, now this is about larger SEO practices. So to kind of pull all of that together, instead of going from here back to a little bit of context, back to big picture, or over to big picture stuff that isn't on do not pay, then back to do not pay. It was just pulling these elements up top. And my caveat in the recording was maybe this is a little too traditional of me, but I really like the classic case study opening where you're talking about what the company does, what they're about. If possible, make it more like this, where it's their origin story, right? Just kind of contextualizing the whole narrative right up front. So mostly I pulled this piece up top. The other piece of feedback, and this kind of applies across the board, is a lot of the article ends up doing almost sentence fragments or really short sentences as paragraphs. So this is one example of it in Parking Tickets, paragraph break, and built dozens of other features. And then it does it more down here, which I get, you want to go for punchiness and all of that. If this were an organic search piece, that might be a lot more important. But because this is a case study, you're trying to weave a consistent narrative, not necessarily get people from line to line. So I just kind of pulled those pieces together so that it kind of reads more cohesively. Kept these bullet points largely the same. Where to go? This piece too, I did note there's maybe an opportunity for another joke here about Vlad and Baiju, who are the founders of Robinhood, the app. And then let's see. Okay, so this was the biggest kind of, I mean, this I think was the biggest change besides pulling out those other pieces I talked about, was talking about all the different things the do not pay offers sets up a great discussion for how they can cover that from an organic search perspective, which Nick does mention further down, but it's not like immediately clear. So like I just added this line here to kind of set up that context a little bit. I think it probably would be helpful if they have it to add a little more context about what went into the decision to invest so much in organic search versus paid search or other digital ads or PPC elsewhere, which they probably have done also, but it's probably worth some of a little bit of additional context here. Yeah, and then we're pulling, so this is basically just a paragraph version of kind of what's scattered around here. You have this right up top where it's mentioning the results, organic, and how it helped drive their Series B valuation. It's just kind of flowing a little more naturally from here's who do pay, here's who do not pay is, here's what they offer, here's the kind of problem statement they faced, and then here's the headline of what what content distribution was able to do for them.
I want to stop for a second here because you had mentioned something before that I'm actually really bullish on, and it's really hard to communicate sometimes. You're big on the musicality of language, right? And writing in general. And you had talked about, individual sentences being paragraphs in there. Can you talk about what that looks like? How are you varying your cadence and the role that plays in the engagingness of a piece? The compellingness of a piece. That's the word. I edit too, right?
I like both words.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then this is, purely anecdotal. It's mostly thinking about what I would like to read through in its entirety instead of just skimming or clicking out of, rather than, an actual assessment of time on page and that kind of thing. So take that with a grain of salt. But musicality is a great word for it because it is just varying sentence length, varying, not the style, but sometimes you can be punchy to make a point. Sometimes you need to be descriptive so that it turns into something more like this. But you can still break it up. So we have this pretty bold statement from Nick followed up by a single word as a paragraph so that it kind of draws readers down, right? And then creates it gives an opportunity for creating a big picture statement of what the takeaway is for this case study, rather than jumping from here's the results to here's how we did it. It's here's the results and here's kind of our overarching philosophy about organic content for search, so that it kind of sets it up as a little bit more of not just a narrative, but kind of an opportunity to communicate what the value is that they bring to clients without having to say, this is the value we bring to clients and this is why we're unique, which is more of what this is about. Here's all the results for other clients we've had, when really, if I'm reading a case study, I don't really need all this other proof. I can see that on a sales page. I want to hear about this project specifically. I got off on a little tangent from what your actual question was, but
yeah, no. I think that's fine though, because there are a couple of things there. I think the main thing is my initial impression of the piece. And Nick, don't take this the wrong way, right? Take it how you will, but that first piece almost feels like it's trying too hard, right? Because it's got a little bit of everything in it. This is what we did for them, and this is what I do for other people, and then this is there's a lot there, and it's a lot to take in, and it's self-admittedly a 5,000 word monster, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas you had said before, the VP on the tail end is making the decision at the very end of the process, right? This is you want to give this piece, this case study, as an example when you're trying to make that kind of a decision to say, this is why we should do it. This company's like ours. This is why we should do it. And then the language itself is making it so it's not difficult to read, right? It's not difficult at all. And Aaron Orendorff was actually on here last week, and he had mentioned something about structure to subheaders specifically, but really to the paragraphs themselves, right? How does it look on the page?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what you're alluding to there too. Is it kind of like that tells you just what it visually looks like without even digging into the words itself.
Mm-hmm.
That communicates something about what's happening there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how it looks on the page and how what you cover when. So, I mean, the goal of case studies is sure the underlying motive is to show how awesome you are, but that's not the stated purpose. Really, your goal should be to have readers see themselves in the customer or the project that you're talking about. So if you're spending, I mean, I just looked here before you started talking about do not pay, there's 400 words where it's mostly talking about content distribution, not do not pay. Whereas this immediately jumps into do not pay, then covers what they do, then jumps over to what the results were, and then gives you space to do how it gives you space to talk about how you did it. So it just kind of flips it. Trying too hard was a good phrase you used, Tommy.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Nick. I know he's going to share this out with the community of people that he's created over time. So, like, I gotta.
I feel like
I'm
I
gonna
should
give
have
you
at least gotten coffee with this guy or something ahead before.
right to his credit, though, and this is something in my own process when I look at a piece, and anybody who's attending, who's been here before, the first thing I do when I edit is I scroll down and I look at all the different subheaders and I look at the images that are there, and I look to see if these things are going to pull me back in, right? Because I know that people aren't going to start from the top and work their way to the bottom. They scan first. Mm-hmm. And to their credit, these subheaders are very compelling, mm-hmm. right? And the imagery that they use is very compelling. Where do you start when you edit?
I mean, I started exactly where you did. I scrolled first. I read the intro and then I scrolled and looked at the headers. And you're right, they're compelling, which is why this isn't a knock on the content itself. I think there's a ton of valuable information in here. But I just got confused because I was like, where are we? Okay, we're talking about this shouldn't be controversial anymore. What shouldn't be? That you just finished talking about do not pay, and now you're jumping into backlinks not being as important as people think. Like I didn't get, there's no connecting point there, right? And then that kind of flowed through with the rest. I mean, there's content production, biggest bottleneck. I mean, I really liked that header, and it's true, and you can keep that header in it. You just need to make sure that, I mean, you can shorten what's under it and make it very specific to do not pay, instead of like here pulling in more context around other clients. So yeah, I scrolled, I scanned, and there's a lot of compelling stuff in there, but it just felt scattershot, right?
Yeah. We have another question here. Can Brooklyn elaborate on what he started saying a few minutes ago, that if this were an organic piece, the punchy lines would not work because it's a case study and not a critical to get people from line to line?
Yeah, sorry, that was so almost the opposite of that. So apparently I should have been more clear there. I'm saying, so if this is a case study, you're not typically going to get people on a case study from search unless they're converting from another page that is aimed at a search term, right? They'd be clicking through to your case studies page because they're interested in learning more about your company or what you offer. So the like one line approach like this, I mean, you see that a lot for SEO specific content. So apparently it works. I'm not gonna knock it because I know it works. I mean, like freaking Neil Patel, right, with his blogs, like it's not quite like line by line by line, but it's pretty close, and whatever he's doing works great. So I'm not going to sit here and say and knock that, but it doesn't, as somebody who reads content all day, every day, except for when I'm writing content or editing content, it's not a great reader experience. It's like, it can be very jarring. So for me, it's a lot more important to vary it, like what Tommy was saying, where you're adding variation on your length and all that. So I was just saying, because this is a case study, the punchiness of kind of getting readers to go from next line to next line, next line, doesn't seem as important to me as it would if it were an SEO piece.
Yeah, and it actually goes to something I read a lot, right, when it comes to this type of stuff. And Stephen King talks about in his book on writing about how certain paragraphs, you can tell just by looking at the paragraph that there's substance, right? And you don't want, like, you want something that looks like there's something you can dig into. And we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but paragraphs like this in a case study kind of give you an idea of, hey, there's a little bit more to dig into here, which I think is interesting. We only have about 6 minutes left here, Brooklyn, so I'd love to just kind of get a speed round of some of the other stuff you thought about the piece as you're going through. Maybe structure of it all, and how the new piece that you've kind of put together here from the other pieces, what that did, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah, let's see. I'm trying to look through the pieces I ended up pulling in. Okay, this is a good example. Great headline, um, but still, like the content under it just felt like what we talked about before, where it's talking a lot more about content distribution's other accomplishments instead of talking about this case and like at least larger content philosophy and approach. So I took this and changed it to this so that it gets at, yes, they're talking about themselves, but it's more about what they offer and what they do. So this felt like a good opportunity to kind of have a little aside. That's why I have it as an H3. That kind of gets into, look, here's what we're all about at contentdistribution.com. We don't worry about backlinks. We don't offer technical SEO or audits or things like that. Like, what we focus on is quality content at scale. And then a little line here that kind of brings it back to talking about do not pay, where hopefully Nick can add in some context about what those initial conversations looked like, what they talked about, what was important to their client. And then that connects the dots down to talking about, okay, here's what the specific opportunity was from a search perspective. So instead of just like getting rid of this altogether, it just shifting it a little bit so that it becomes more of a, maybe not too grandiose, but like, this is our philosophy and here's what we do and here's what we don't do, so that somebody reading through it has a pretty clear picture a third of the way down, what this agency offers, right? Let's see. Do not pay helps a very specific set of people during a specific time frame. This stayed largely the same because I think it connects really well to this whole idea of what went into their keyword research and their strategy for organic search. It just was more about bringing it a little bit closer together. So I think how it was, we had, let's see. Yeah, I just had quite a bit between where we're talking about do not pay and when it talks about what the opportunity was. So this was just more about making them mesh a little closer together. Also, I mean, clarity and specificity is always top of mind editing. So originally this sentence was a yearly subscription for do not pay is $36, meaning reaching users at their time of need is critical. So two thoughts. One, I didn't really know what this sentence meant as a whole, but each of these elements I felt like was very important to call out. This part because you're talking about scaling to a lot of consumers at a low price point. So SEO is going to be a great contender for a great search channel, and reaching users at their time of need is critical. That kind of sets up the whole discussion of what went into the strategy, because it's not going to be enough to have like high volume keywords like lawyer fees or something like that. It's going to be a lot more impactful for conversion to get into long tail, often localized keywords like resolving traffic violation in Los Angeles, which is exactly what they did. So I just kind of separated those out so that you get both points across rather than just taking it out when it felt confusing. Okay, I've got a couple minutes. So I actually didn't get to edit these sections, but they have a lot of great information in them. I would just do inline edits for kind of making them conversational and making sure there aren't little things like this where it says is $36 means. So just kind of right in the weeds, granular stuff. On down to same for keyword research and how they optimized. And then at the end here, I basically added back in some of the elements that they spoke to originally, but with a much higher word count than what was necessary, and in a way that wasn't specific to the do not pay project, right? So what scaling content up looked like for them, we can add that back in and make it specific to do not pay. What topic prioritization looked like. So there's quite a bit on keyword research. I'm pulling, I think it was something like 36,000 keywords, but then at 37,000 keywords. But then it kind of stops there instead of talking about, okay, well, how did you take that very long list of keywords and prioritize for what would have the biggest possible impact in the shortest amount of time? So that's another section I would suggest. And then measurement and adaptation as kind of a final takeaway. So I would look at this as condense these middle sections in a similar way as what we did up top here with these first few sections, and then add in each of these bullets as essentially separate H2s.
I love that. Thank you so much for being super thorough with that too, Brooklyn. There was, I can't wait for people to see the actual you going through this, the video that you sent over the Loom, because I found it incredibly insightful, just kind of looking over your shoulder as you were going through it. We are at time, so I want to thank everybody who has shown up. Thank you again, Brooklyn, for being here. If you are interested in signing up for the next episode will be with Margaret Jones, the content lead over at Airtable. Very much looking forward to her coming on as well. Incredible. She's edited me once before and is absolutely brutal, which I love. You got to have a brutal editor. So yeah, thanks so much, everyone. If you want to be notified about the next episode, I'll be sending out the replay here. You can be notified about the next one, and then all of the other resources that we've mentioned here will be available. So thank you so much, Brooklyn, and have a great rest of the night, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.